Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on crisis, displacement, and housing, land, and property solution in Lebanon. We have a distinguished panel of speakers with us today, each bringing valuable expertise to this critical discussion. So, as we all know, whether natural disasters, conflict, or economic shocks often lead to displacement, leaving individuals and communities vulnerable and facing immense challenges related to their HLP rights. Lebanon history is marked by periods of conflict and displacement, significantly impacting its HLP sector. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War led to the displacement of a large number of Palestinians into Lebanon, resulting in a complex property ownership issues. The Lebanese Civil War from 1975 to 1990 further exacerbated the HLP crisis, causing widespread destruction, displacement, and fragmentation of land ownership. The 2006 Israeli war and the devastating 2020 Beirut Port explosion compounded these challenges, leading to significant property damage, displacement, and economic hardship. The influx of Syrian refugees since 2011 has further strained the country's housing market and exacerbated existing HLP issues. Adding to these pre-existing vulnerabilities, the severe economic crisis of 2019 has dramatically worsened the situation. The collapse of the Lebanese pound, coupled with hyperinflation and widespread unemployment, has made it increasingly difficult for residents to afford housing, with many facing evictions and further displacement. This economic downturn has also created new challenges for HLP rights, including increased disputes over property ownership, difficulties in accessing legal remedies, and a general destabilization of the real estate market. So historically, the government of Lebanon has in some cases intervened. However, these measures were short-term fixes and have not been integrated into a comprehensive housing strategy that addresses the ongoing risks Lebanon faces, as the institutional and regulatory frameworks governing access to housing in Lebanon are weak and ineffective. Also, there has been no single governmental institution governing all aspects of the housing sector since the dissolution of the Ministry of Housing and Cooperatives in 2000, and no overarching legal framework or adopted strategy covering all legal aspects of the sector. Instead, various laws, regulations, and institutions have shaped the housing sector over the years, including laws related to rent control, which have often been used to compensate for the lack of affordable housing policies. The recent escalation of hostilities in Lebanon since October 2023 has added another layer of complexity to Lebanon's HLP crisis. The conflict has led to significant property damage, displacement, and economic hardship, particularly in southern Lebanon and in Beirut's southern suburbs. According to UN Habitat's Lebanon Damage Assessment, the number of destroyed units in 4 governorates was equal to 42,000 units, and in Beirut was approximate to 4,000 units, according to UNOSAT. So these historical and contemporary factors have created a complex and multi-phased HLP landscape in Lebanon, necessitating innovative and sustainable solutions to address the needs of displaced population and vulnerable communities. Fortunately, the support and collaboration of international actors have played a vital role in finding HLP solutions during times of crisis. So the session will focus on some of these crises in Lebanon, highlighting the government and the private sector's approach to addressing some of these issues. The session will include a case study on the 2020 Beirut Port explosion. It will also present potential solutions for addressing the current and recent displacement in Lebanon by utilizing the vacant building stock in Beirut, and also representatives from the Lebanese government will conclude by discussing the state's approach following the 2019 economic crisis. So today, we will explore these challenges and, most importantly, delve into potential solutions. So each speaker will have approximately 20 minutes for their presentation, and each will have a dedicated, and after which we will have a dedicated question and answer session. I encourage you to think about the questions as the presentations unfold. So our first speaker is Mr. Roger Karam. Roger is the founder and managing partner at Legalist Law Practice. He focuses his practice on corporate advisory. Roger has remarkable experience in administrative law, as well as the rule of law and public communication, public affairs program, and drafting laws and regulation. Since 2022, Roger has been acting as the legal advisor for UN Habitat for the Beirut project, which he will be presenting. He holds a bachelor degree of law and master degree in political administrative science and is currently pursuing his PhD in political science with focus on cultural study. So Roger will provide a background on the Beirut project that came as a response to the Beirut Port explosion in 2020 and will discuss the identified HLP challenges and implemented solutions for displaced people. He will also emphasize the legal arrangement with the beneficiaries, the technical and legal support, and the lessons learned. Dear Roger, the floor is yours.
First of all, thank you, Ernella. Good afternoon, everyone. My intervention will be about the lessons learned from the Beirut project, please, yes, which came as a response to the 2020 Beirut Port explosion. This is table of content. Okay, introduction background. As you may know, on the afternoon of 4 August 2020, a massive explosion at the port of Beirut devastated the city. The explosion damaged some of the oldest neighborhoods of Beirut, ones that survived a 15-year-old war from 1975 to 1990. The explosion left more than 200 fatalities, more than 6,000 injuries, and around 300,000 displacement. The explosion affected neighborhoods located within a radius of 5 kilometers of the blast epicenter at the port of Beirut, causing widespread destruction to homes, businesses, infrastructure, and disrupting economic activity. Heavy destruction took place within a radius of 2 kilometers from the port. Ermel, Mdawar, and part of Ashrafiyya and Saifi were the most affected cadastres. The explosion was a major setback for Lebanon, which had already been suffering from financial and economic crisis, refugee crisis, COVID-19 pandemic, and an ongoing political unrest. These are pictures of evidencing the explosion and the damages. Now, response action. As a response action in the aftermath of the explosion, UN Habitat is implementing the Beirut Housing Rehabilitation and Cultural and Creative Industries Recovery Project, or the Beirut Project, through funding from the Lebanon Financing Facility, a multi-donor trust that is under the administration of the World Bank. The project aims to support the rehabilitation of historical buildings for the most vulnerable people and to provide emergency support to creative practitioners and entities in the cultural sector in damaged areas. The duration of the project is between 2022 and 2024. The location is Beirut, Lebanon. The project consists of two main components. The first component consists of housing recovery and rehabilitation implemented by UN Habitat. The second component consists of emergency support for cultural and creative industries implemented by UNESCO. Component 1, implemented by UN Habitat, consists of two subcomponents. Subcomponent 1 related to residential housing rehabilitation, and subcomponent 2 related to technical assistance for rental support. The target area consists of 4 cadastres within a 5-kilometer radius from the blast zone: Ashrafiyya, Mdawar, Saifi, and Ermel, with an emphasis on Mdawar and Mez districts due to the high concentration of blast-damaged buildings with heritage value. The project targets several residential buildings of heritage value severely damaged by the explosion and that have not been completely rehabilitated and are located in the target area. Now for the implementation methodology. As for the implementation methodology, it consists of 9 steps, 9-step process: identification and validation of eligible residential building, selection criteria of beneficiaries, reviewing legal documents related to ownership and occupancy, community engagement and communication and outreach, engineering and architectural design, permitting and approval in close coordination with authorities, signature of final agreements with beneficiaries, owners, and occupants, procurement of contractors and implementing partners, monitoring of work and quality assurance. Now for the legal review and assessment. Prior to agreeing on the rehabilitation of buildings, UN Habitat, with the support of the legal team, had to undergo the meticulous process of reviewing and assessing the legal status of building and beneficiaries, both owners and tenants, in order to verify that the legal process is adherent to applicable laws and regulations related to the project, particularly real estate ownership law, expropriation law, and rent laws. The legal process starts by obtaining from beneficiaries relevant information and documents related to the status of the buildings, its owners and tenants. This includes a wide range of documents, including but not limited to documents evidencing building ownership, rental and occupancy agreements, the ability and capacity of owners and tenants to enter into agreement, the accuracy of representation in case of signing by proxy. Then UN Habitat start negotiation with beneficiaries, owners and tenants to obtain their approval to the project standards and requirements. In parallel, UN Habitat leads negotiations between owners and tenants to limit tensions, try to align as much as possible the counterparties over the situation, and help to build a trustful relationship between them. In case counterparties agree to engage into the process, then UN Habitat, with the assistance of the legal team, develop all required legal documents related to support the implementation of rehabilitation and support tenancy rights. Now for the legal and operational challenges and solutions. The legal framework for housing in Lebanon poses multiple legal challenges with respect to tenancy, in addition to other various legal and operational challenges. These challenges required UN Habitat to find solutions to achieve the objective of the project, aiming at residential housing rehabilitation and assistance for rental support. First, there are tenancy-related challenges related to old rent law. Lebanon rental sector has lacked coherent policy support. Adopted policies have imposed rent control on rental agreements concluded before 1992, shifting responsibility of affording housing from the state to private owners without addressing the root problem and support for low-income households. A law was enacted in 1992 to temporarily extend all rental contracts concluded before 23rd of July 1992, a situation that persisted for the subsequent 30 years and is now commonly called old rent or exceptional rent laws. To address the tension and legal disputes arising from freezing old rents, another law was enacted in 2014, which focused primarily on two key aspects: gradual rental fees increases, whereby rental fees would be allowed to increase over a 6-year initial period, after which the full equivalent rental allowance would be applicable for an additional 3 years before complete liberation of contracts. This aims to ensure secure tenancy for a total of 9 years. And in addition, the creation of a rent assistance fund. This fund aimed at assisting individuals earning less than 3 times the minimum monthly wage. This law, which was enacted in 2014, faced numerous implementation issues following the Constitutional Council's annulment of some of its articles. In some cases, these changes foster varying judicial interpretation, creating instability and ambiguity for both tenants and owners. In an attempt by lawmakers to offer a definitive answer and resolve these questions, an amended version of the law was enacted in 2017. The application of the amendment law of 2017 has led to significant problems, revealing a lack of clarity in resolving the rental crisis. This is mainly since the establishment of the Rent Assistance Fund was not put into practice. 3 main issues emerged from the judiciary: the mechanism for determining rent value, implementing the amended law in absence of Rent Assistance Fund, and the timeline of applying the legislation. One significant hurdle linked to this amendment is the inconsistency among judiciary in adopting either the 2014 law or the 2017 law as for the basis of counting the extended tenancy years, which led to divergent court decisions. If counted from 2004, extensions to rental agreements will end in 2023, whereas counting from 2017, extensions will end in 2026 and 2029 for tenants benefiting from the Rent Assistance Fund. To address the situation, UN Habitat required owners to pledge the following: to guarantee the right of tenants to return to their dwellings and their continuity of their right to reside therein for a period of 3 years post-rehabilitation without an increase in the rental fees except for the legally permissible increases. In case of conflict in the applicable laws related to exceptional rents, or in case of conflicting interpretation of the law, particularly regarding the date of commencement and of the extension years, the owners are committed to applying the law that is favorable for the tenants and to adhere to the interpretation closest to the interests of the latter. Now, there are other challenges which are related to the provision of new rental affordable housing. Rental agreements concluded as of July 23, 1992 are governed by the Code of Obligation and Contracts, and the principle of contractual freedom is applicable on rental contracts after liberating contracts from rental control post-1992. As a result, rental rates have been entirely market-driven with no real governmental intervention aimed at ensuring affordability and safeguarding tenants from eviction. Following the onset of the economic crisis in 2019, rents initially began to rise in Lebanese pounds, but later transitioned to a gradual dollarization trend. Today, the housing market has almost entirely adopted the US dollar as its currency, rapidly returning to the pre-economic crisis price levels. To address the situation, UN Habitat has identified within the scope of the Beirut project several vacant units and commenced negotiations with property owners to obtain their consent for renting the apartments for a 3-year period at maximum 1/3 of their market rent value. A comprehensive market study is conducted to determine the current market rental value of each apartment. This market value will then be reduced to 1/3 of its original amount to establish its below market rate, BMR, value as per the specific criteria established for the Beirut project. Other various legal and operational challenges. The tensions between owners and tenants may be attributed to several reasons: the lack of understanding of tenancy rights, owners' duties, and rental contract, the incomprehension and multiple interpretation of the old rent law, particularly regarding the matter of adopting either the 2014 law or the 2017 law as the basis for counting the tenancy extended 9 years, the dispute over the mechanism for determining the rent value subject to increases as per the above-mentioned laws, the non-establishment of the Rent Assistance Fund, which was planned to assist the tenants in payment of increased rental fees. A high demand for housing among younger generations leads owners to prefer to enter new rental contracts with new tenants instead of old tenants who enjoy more legal protection under old rent law. A market-driven private sector and the desire of some landlords to sell their old residential property, encouraged by real estate developers aiming to buy and tear down old buildings and replacing them by contemporary commercial or residential towers. Also, although various legal and factual challenges existed long before the start of the economic crisis in 2019 and the occurrence of the Beirut Port explosion of the 4th of August 2020, the impacts of the crisis and the explosion have often increased tensions between owners and tenants, considering the following: the tough financial and economic crisis in the country, as local currency was depreciating and people purchasing power is decreasing, while the minimum wage has not been proportionally increased. The dispute over the increase in rental fees went deeper due to currency depreciation. The dispute over who shall conduct the repairs, owners or tenant. The reluctance of some owners to restore their badly maintained buildings, accompanied with a high motive for sale and demolition, which increased due to the massive damage of these buildings resulting from the explosion. The eviction threats resulting from building structural damage. These tensions increase challenges to the security of tenancy rights and maximize the eviction threat. Moreover, some tenants had worries of cooperating with the project plan of rehabilitation in case their dwellings are still occupied due to the fear of forfeiting their their right to legal extension of rents if their units were vacated. The solution was conducting negotiation with both owners and tenants to convince them of the feasibility of the project and their common interest in rehabilitating their buildings and residential units. Now, for the legal arrangement with beneficiaries, this includes three major types of agreements. The signature of owner's deed of commitment. This document constitutes a unilateral act signed by the owners. It includes their commitments and obligations towards UN Habitat in accordance with the criteria set by UN Habitat to approve financing rehabilitation works. Then we have the signature of agreements governing relationship between owners and tenants. This type of agreement aims to guarantee the right of tenants to return to their dwellings after their rehabilitation and the continuity of their right to reside therein for a period of 3 years post-rehabilitation without increasing the rental fees. Therefore, anything that goes beyond the limits of this agreement shall be governed by relevant legal provisions or basic contractual arrangements or rent agreements between the two parties. Then we have the signature of new rent agreements between owners and low to middle income families in need of housing. This type of agreement constitutes rental agreement between the owners and new tenants who shall be selected from vulnerable to low to middle income families or individuals of need of housing. It should be noted that this type of agreement includes many key elements that are not usually found in typical rental agreements, whereby it aims to ensure affordability by benefiting tenants from rental fees below market rate, in addition to safeguarding them from eviction. Now, for the monitoring of beneficiaries' commitments, to ensure that the beneficiary, particularly the owners, carry out their commitments in all stages, especially after the completion of their rehabilitation works, the beneficiaries grant UN Habitat the right to monitor the implementation of their commitments in all their aspects. In case of failure to respond to UN Habitat requests, or in case of breach of their commitment, they enable UN Habitat to exercise their right to monitor. UN Habitat may resort to the available legal means to bind the beneficiaries to such commitments. Now we move to technical assistance and rental support. The Beirut project provides technical assistance for housing rehabilitation through safeguarding heritage by ensuring that property owners remain from demolishing, altering, or refrain from demolishing, altering, undertaking any construction that might impact structural integrity, or modifying the specification or external appearance of the building post-rehabilitation for a period of 9 years post-rehabilitation. Facilitating the safe return of owners and tenants to their dwellings after rehabilitation, thereby contributing to the broad recovery of the city. Achieving tenure security for the beneficiaries, owners, and tenants due to the rehabilitation of damaged dwellings. The project also provides rental support through developing awareness raising to secure renters' rights and minimize eviction risk, resolving disputes between owners and tenants resulting from the multiple interpretation of the old rent law, ensuring tenancy security for a period of 3 years post-rehabilitation, particularly for tenants bound by agreements held under the old rent law, without increasing the rental fees, and ensuring the provision of affordable or below market rate (BMR) housing for middle to low income families for 3 years post-rehabilitation, with rental fees at maximum 1/3 of the market rental value. As for ensuring the provision of affordable or below market rate housing, this will be achieved by renting out previously vacant units to eligible families according to the following eligibility and priority criteria. eligibility criteria, families who do not own any residential property within a 10-kilometer radius from the project site, vulnerable to low to middle income families who meet the standards applicable to the below market rate housing, BMR. This will be assessed using a socio-economic and legal survey used to identify beneficiary eligibility. Priority will be given to female-headed households, families with children, elderly individuals or families with elderly members, students studying in the Beirut project area, families that were residing within the Beirut project area but had to relocate following the Port of Beirut explosion, families that have members working within the Beirut project area. To guarantee achievement, the deed of commitment required to be signed by the owners act as a pivotal tool in preserving heritage buildings, facilitating the safe return of owners and tenants to their dwellings, solidifying tenancy rights, and guaranteeing the provision of affordable housing. Moreover, the contractual documents that are drafted to be signed by both owners and tenants are legal binding documents to counterparties that aim to solidify tenancy rights through ensuring the achievement of the objectives as previously outlined with respect to tenancy security and affordability. Now for the lessons learned, the need for a wider urban recovery and reform potential. The Beirut project constitutes a short-term response to rehabilitation and rental and legal support in the aftermath of the Port of Beirut explosion. The project will establish a crucial foundation for future housing recovery strategies and policies, particularly considering the complex housing, land, and property issues. The case studies, legal processes, human experiences, various challenges documented during this project will provide invaluable insights and serve as a guide for a broader, more comprehensive approach in the future. However, the project is not expected to trigger any legislative change in short term. Despite this fact, the project engages relevant stakeholders such as the Governor of Beirut, the Municipality of Beirut, the Public Corporation for Housing, and the Directorate General of Antiquities, and in an open dialogue concerning housing legislation, especially rental, housing recovery strategies, and housing policy reforms. Findings from the extensive legal review of the cases can initiate discussions that could influence future housing legislative reforms. The project also engaged relevant stakeholders like the Public Corporation for Housing in the development of a below-market rate strategy for vulnerable tenants. This dialogue can be further explored with lawmakers and other relevant stakeholders beyond the project for a long-term response to housing land property solution in Lebanon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roger, for your presentation on the complex HLP landscape found in the project and the solution identified. We all recognize the challenges of balancing heritage preservation, the safe returns of owners and tenants, tenancy security, and affordable housing. It's encouraging to see the solutions identified for these interconnected components. So our next speaker now is Ms. Abir Zaatari. Abir is an urban planner and research coordinator at the Beirut Urban Lab based in the American University of Beirut. She holds a bachelor degree in architecture and master's in urban planning and policy. Abir's research focuses on urban housing and land policies and how they influence different modalities of housing provision and acquisition in Beirut and at the Global South. Her work emphasizes leveraging research to address urban inequalities and advocate for inclusive housing policies. Abir will be telling us about housing response strategies in crisis settings in Lebanon with a proposition to consider Beirut's vacant housing stock as a more sustainable housing solution in emerging setting. Abir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ornella. Is the microphone? It's working. Thank you to those who stuck around after 3 hours of 3 days actually of intensive conference sessions. I'm gonna start with a soft opener. I choose to start with this recent image from Beirut. It captures a 1940s building left to decay by its owners and the oversight of the state. On the first floor, a Syrian family rents a unit. A large, worn-out makeshift tarp covers the balcony, giving the residents some level of privacy. Next to the balcony, a water reservoir connected to an ad hoc rainwater collection system, set up either by the residents or an NGO amid one of Lebanon's worst public service provision crises. Tangled electric wires and water pipes connect to an informal network of generator providers and potable water suppliers, patchwork solutions to a collapsing infrastructure. Despite the apparent deteriorating condition of the building, renting in a ruined building like this one remains one of the few options for Syrian refugees seeking housing in the city. Indeed, these decaying properties are left either intentionally in anticipation of a market recovery that have been in recession for 5 years, or unintentionally due to unresolved inheritance issues, travel restrictions on foreign owners, or simply poor financial capabilities. In the meantime, a property owner attempts to extract the last bit of profit from this dying structure by renting it to impoverished families, migrant workers, or refugees. Strikingly, without going unnoticed, the apartment on the second floor remains vacant, likely because another owner finds no value or incentive to rent it, renovate it, or sell it at sub-market rates. This image is a testament to how Beirut, a site of polycrisis, is transforming in the wake of financialization. It shows how specific decisions, poor enforcement of existing regulations, have induced speculative practices, leaving a section of the city's housing stock in dilapidated condition with high vacancy rates. Meanwhile, as the city grapples with overlapping and recurring crises, interventions remain limited to short-term fixes, such as water pipes, tarps, and ad hoc solutions, adopted by residents, the state, and the NGOs that have become the norm. As we catch our breath from yet another crisis, it has become more evident that we need to address crisis as a short-term parenthesis. That is part of a bigger story and trend. So how can the very symptoms of an overlapping crisis become an entry point for sustainable, cost-effective housing solution? Indeed, when looking at the crisis response in Lebanon and Beirut, we see that responses to displacement have remained trapped in short-term, unsustainable relief strategies that fail to address long-term housing needs. These strategies overlook existing opportunities, in this case I will mention vacant buildings, as viable emergency solutions. And we really can't understand the reasons behind this approach without reflecting on the deep embedment of the financialization of housing in Beirut, as well as the assetization of property, over than its role as a social good. The consequence of this approach has become most visible during the crisis that has passed, the war, when the state and humanitarian agencies grapple to consider costly, unsustainable solutions, such as turning schools into collective shelters, over using a straightforward solution, which is the vacant housing stock. So for those who are not very familiar with what happened in Lebanon in the past few months, and just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, Israel launched a large-scale war on Lebanon on September 23, following a year of escalating tensions at Lebanon's southern border. The aggression triggered the displacement of nearly 1 million people, roughly a quarter of the Lebanese population. IDPs mostly moved from villages and cities in the southern border to the relatively safer zones in Lebanon, most prominently Beirut, Mount Lebanon, and the north. While a ceasefire agreement came into effect on November 27, more than 43,000 homes, according to UN's damage assessment, were partially or fully destroyed, leaving many families with no home to go back to. So where did these 1 million displaced go during the aggressions, and how did they access housing? The map you see here shows IDP districts of arrival. Districts in dark blue are the ones who hosted the biggest number of IDPs. And you see Beirut is the darkest, which will be the focus of this presentation, hosted 18% of IDPs, or around 144,000 IDPs, making it the city with the highest displacement density relative to its size. But how and where did these individuals find shelter in Beirut? Definitely not through the market. Okay. Definitely not through the market. We found that despite the presence of a significant number of vacant housing units in the city, only 3% of IDPs were able to rent in Beirut during the conflict. Those who managed to secure rentals faced harsh conditions, including upfront payments, inflated rents, strict occupancy restrictions on the number of occupants and tenants, discriminatory practices in certain neighborhoods across religious and sectarian lines and identities and practices. The state's response The state's response, on the other hand, relied on repurposing public schools as collective shelters. In the absence of a Ministry of Housing in Lebanon, disaster response efforts were led by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Environment, reflecting a lack of institutional capacity to address the displacement and housing crises. So in Beirut, at least 30,000 internally displaced persons were hosted in 90 public and private schools, where education was interrupted for over 15,000 students. With this approach set in motion, NGO efforts focused on making these makeshift shelters functional. This included installing partitions for privacy, implementing costly modifications to schools, such as sanitary and electric networks, and other additions to public and private schools. While these interventions secured free shelter for a large number of people, interventions were temporary, expensive, and environmentally unsustainable. Once the ceasefire was declared, all the works were dismantled, generating significant waste and material loss. Additionally, funds that were already allocated for school renovations pre-war were depleted due to war-related damages, and additional costs were needed to restore these schools. Non-governmental organizations also turned to repurposing sports stadiums into shelter, incurring exorbitant financial and environmental costs. For example, one agency reported needing $10 million to create temporary shelter for 1,000 people, which probably wouldn't have even been ready by the time of the ceasefire. So as you can see, the state was willing to mobilize functional and essential public service institutions, such as schools, sports stadiums, and other public spaces, while overlooking a large stock of vacant buildings that are not in use in the city. Those who were unable to secure housing through formal channels turned to political strongmen who forcibly occupied vacant apartments and buildings. These non-state actors were encouraged by the presence of a large number of vacant buildings in Beirut and prompted to champion illegal occupations, hence reviving the clientelistic practices of the Civil War when militias encouraged squatting as a favor to their supporters. This led to strengthening and expanding a political territoriality, but also a detrimental effect for the displaced by exposing them to unsafe living conditions, exposing them to police crackdowns, evictions, and conflicts with property owners, increasing tensions with host communities, and reinforcing fears among Beirut's residents about long-term squatting and reducing solidarity with the displaced. Others had no option but to stay in the open and sleep on the street, particularly marginalized non-Lebanese communities. So in light of these failed responses, how can we imagine a shift from crisis-driven, short-term solutions to an essential long-term housing strategy that locates housing in how we respond? If vacancy is currently seen as a symptom of Beirut's dysfunctional and financialized market, how can we turn it into a solution? So we did a survey in 2023 of Beirut's building, and we found that 20% of the housing stock was vacant, which is equivalent to around 44,000 empty units. To put this in perspective, in international context, when vacancy levels reach 7%, a policy action is made. We looked at these vacant units and where are they located, and we found that most of them were located in partially occupied buildings. Some were located in fully vacant, newly developed buildings, and we found 7,000 units that are entirely located in fully vacant old buildings, which can present a clear opportunity for emergency shelter initiatives. Of these 7,000 units, Of these 7,000 units, 93% have been vacant for more than 2 years, 90% is unfurnished, 80% is located in buildings constructed before 1972, and 73% is in a habitable condition and requires very minor repairs. And these units also vary in the size and could accommodate different modalities of families and sheltering needs. But why should we act on these buildings in the first place? Why isn't the property owner free to decide what to do with their property? And particularly when we put private property as something untouchable. Well, the responsibility of each of us is to their city extends beyond the property itself. So these buildings today contribute to urban decay and social deterioration, creating what is known as the broken window syndrome. So persistent vacancy beyond typical market cycles leads to property deterioration, infrastructure degradation, social problems, and straining of public services. They become magnets for vandalism and illicit practices, and as we have seen in the war, invite forced squatting practices by strongmen. So we argue that repurposing these vacant buildings can provide a low-cost, environmentally friendly, and sustainable emergency shelter that moves beyond short-term relief efforts towards structural, long-term interventions. It can curb real estate speculation, bringing benefit to the whole city and city dwellers, and it can expand the stock of affordable housing. We've heard many tell us that this approach might not work, that it is utopic, but actually we have a plethora of success stories from Spain, Brazil, South Africa, Brussels, and other cities that we can borrow from, who are all speaking and have started taking action on vacant properties in their city. The lab has also worked on a study on how this proposition can be implemented in Beirut, but I am not at liberty of discussing it here. But we can speak of different barriers that we need to overcome to implement this proposal, such as, first of all, the ideological resistance, of course, and how property is perceived as an untouchable asset. We can establish needed mechanisms that can allow owners to anticipate a level of return while protecting the property against potential risks. There's also the financial barriers from the side of property owners for initial rehabilitation, which can be resolved by soft financing, the interventions of development institutions and non-profit organizations. There's also the logistical barriers, which require a champion or a dedicated actor that most often has to be a non-profit organization that can help bridge the gap between stakeholders and ensure project execution. Concerns over prolonged occupation or squatting can be cleared through a clear timeline and exit plan, and legitimacy concerns requires that the state is an active actor and partner in this proposal. So just before I close, I just want to highlight again that The history of back-to-back crises in Lebanon makes it even more urgent to consider closely the sustainable and temporary use of abandoned buildings as emergency and affordable shelter, and to rethink why is it okay to sacrifice our children's learning without considering vacant and abandoned properties as a viable housing solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Abir, for that insightful presentation. Abir gave us an overview of the different modalities of shelter acquisition during the recent Israeli war, provoking us to consider existing resources and opportunities in the city, such as vacant housing, for sustainable and viable alternative solution. Our third and last speaker is Ms. Claudine Karake. Ms. Claudine is the Senior Advisor to the Minister of Finance. She holds a master's degree in computer science and business management. She has over 25 years of extensive experience. She has led and implemented reforms programs across several countries, addressing all structural, organizational, and operational aspects for public finances and tax administration. She has also led and executed fiscal reforms program related to revenue collection and land management in Lebanon. She possesses in-depth knowledge of the requirements of both the public and private sector in designing strategic and operational frameworks for modernizing projects and reform initiatives. Ms. Claudine has also worked with various international organizations, including the IMF, the World Bank, UNDP, the European Union, and other international donors, serving as an advisor on tax, land management, and cadastral administration. So Claudine will be talking about the repercussions that have resulted from the economic collapse in 2019 and the strategic pathways set by the government to overcome the challenges. She will also be highlighting the state's key priorities for a sustainable housing future in Lebanon. The floor is yours, Claudine.
Thank you, Ornella. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be short, promise. How this works? Okay. So, thank you for the two insightful presentations from my colleagues. In fact, my presentation addresses the crisis in Lebanon, but from a different perspective. The focus will be on strategic policy recommendations, transparency in real estate, and public-private partnerships. Before diving into solutions, let's take a quick look at Lebanon's economic crisis. Since 2019, as my colleagues said before me, since 2019, Lebanon has been facing layered economic crisis impacting housing, land, and property, driven by several interconnected factors. I would say they are direct causes and indirect causes. The direct one is the financial system, the government insolvency resulting in broad economic stagnation, the hyperinflation that has drastically reduced citizens' ability to afford housing. The Lebanese pound has lost over 98% of its value, reducing the purchasing power. With the inflation, the salaries have lost their value, worsening economic hardship again. And the fifth one is the international community that has paused to provide financial assistance, further worsening the housing crisis. Coupled with indirect pressing factors that have worsened the situation, the COVID-19, the political impasse, the Beirut Port explosion. In addition of all these, we have the lack of institutional governance needed to be re-engineered, the need to update the legislative framework, and last but not least, the IT disruption due to severe funding shortages and skilled labor migration, especially in the government sector, in the public sector. This deep crisis has created the need for action, and the newly formed government is working to shift Lebanon from stagnation to rapid recovery in order to not to be stuck in the bottom. Next are proposals for strategic reforms. Okay. Sorry, how to go back? The green one to go back. To go back. No, it didn't work. برجع. Oui. Okay. So these proposals will lay down to the foundation for long-term economic stabilized and market growth. The first, of course, is stabilizing the financial sector. Currently, the government is pushing toward financial restructuring, distributing losses, and strengthening banking system, as well as enhancing transparency, implementing tax and policy reforms with the technical assistance from the IMF, including as well investing in housing and infrastructure with the support of UN Habitat and the World Bank, and promoting sustainable development in collaboration with UNDP. Breaking these proposals down further, we start by mapping strategic pathways for real estate growth. Lebanon is seriously considering introducing fiscal measures to boost real estate. For instance, we are planning to impose tax on long-term vacant housing units to respond to Abir's problem, to stimulate economic activity and encourage property use. We're considering providing tax incentives for housing cooperatives to encourage affordable housing, lowering licensing and real estate registration fees to stimulate transactions, offer VAT refund and income tax exemptions for housing investments, and impose a temporary, and I insist on temporary, reconstruction surtax because of the damage of the houses after the Israeli attack. And last, higher capital gain tax on real estate profits by extending the tax period, the exemption tax period, from 12 to 25 years to boost revenues. Beyond taxation, green and smart housing policies can create a more sustainable real estate sector. In that regard, previous budget laws in Lebanon have included exemptions related to eco-friendly and technologically advanced housing solutions. Among these are the tax exemption for green building, the smart housing initiatives to integrate digital infrastructure and optimize resource use, and in addition, the legislative reforms are also necessary by the modernization of outdated building laws and enactment of new proposed laws, and empowering the municipality to enforce better urban planning. These policies should be coupled with digital transformation and working on reforming administrative procedures, reactivating housing loans, and implementing secure digital ledger for property transactions. In addition, pushing forward with these leasing ownership solutions, for sure, any initiative must work hand in hand with the private sector, especially in Lebanon, given all the complications we have already talked about. So PPT, if it is well structured, can offer a viable solution for leveraging state-owned land for housing projects, integrating commercial spaces to increase revenue, allowing developers to share project revenues with landowners, utilizing state-owned land for construction material production, and investing in roads and transportation in rural areas. To summarize the key elements for building resilience, resilient, and inclusive housing market, the future of Lebanon housing sector depends on reviving the real estate market, increasing government revenue through taxation and PPPs, encouraging investments and improving housing accessibility, enhancing transparency through governance reforms. Now here, let's explore the role and responsibilities of different stakeholders. To implement these strategies effectively, the RASI matrix will be instrumental in clearly defining the role and responsibility of various stakeholders. For example, here is a typical case illustrating the RASI, the responsible, accountable, consultant, and informed, which we can build upon in our next proposals. To capitulate the housing example, we're going to compare the approach to affordable housing with other countries. Lebanon primarily relies on the private sector for affordable housing but lacks strong government policies. Other countries offer different models, such as Turkey, for example. The government-led model, TOKI, supports developers financially, whereas Germany, strong tenant protection and rent control laws. The UAE as well has a strong public-private partnership with the government incentives. In conclusion, Lebanon needs a hybrid model that blends public support with private sector involvement. Finally, the key recommendations to ensure a sustainable housing future for long-term sustainability, Lebanon should strengthen its legal framework for public housing and green construction, implement blockchain, it's going to be at the end, promote PPPs, and to attract international funding, and of course comply with the international government standard ISO for quality assurance, and engage the Lebanese diaspora in housing projects through investments program. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudine, for that insightful presentation on the repercussions that have resulted from the monetary collapse and the solutions and the key priorities set by the government. With the new government in place, we are hopeful that some concrete solutions will be implemented and tangible progress will be made, hopefully. All right. So I would like to thank all of our speakers for their excellent contributions. We have now some time for questions from the audience, if anyone has any question.
شكرا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Thank you. Through the intervention of Professor Hiba about the subject of vacant housing, I want to shed light on this aspect, more of this problematic. Not also in times of crises, such as the crisis in Lebanon and similar countries which are struggling with conflicts, but also this problematic of vacant houses is the problem of many other countries, such as Morocco. We in Morocco, we paid attention to this problem, and also we asked the question after a lot of studies. The studies have shown that housing or vacant housing represents a huge percentage of houses in Morocco. How can we fix this problem, or how can these vacant houses fix housing problems and also provide low-income families with houses? For me, this is a problematic and an issue. There were some suggested solutions. Firstly, we have to ask the question, what are the reasons that lead us or that lead owners to not put their houses in the market in order to fix the problem of housing? I believe that this is that there are multiple problems, but one of the main reasons it might be the problem of land speculation, because people own land and houses, especially when it is supported from the government. They just freeze it and they do not put it into use until the prices go up after 5 or 10 years, and then they sell it. The problem of land speculation is the reason, but maybe there is another reason, which is the reason of the fear of the loss of the ownership or the loss of housing through disputes that might occur with the tenants. Here we ask the question of legal frameworks that might fix the rights that organize the dynamics of renting in order to promote the ability of or the acceptance of owners to rent their houses. However, we did not reach any concrete results. Another reason, the third reason, is the legal constraints. Although there were reforms, but there is this problem of laws. People are afraid of going to courts and all these procedures. And these procedures, they might lose the right due to multiple problems. These three problems, land speculation, a legal problem, and also a judicial problem. These problems we should look into these problems in order to find solutions. I suggest in the last intervention there was this taxation on owners. I do not say the opposite, but the institutions and the government must promote or must encourage the owners in order to incorporate their houses into the market in order to fix this problem of housing in the Arab countries, which are going, whether those who are going through crisis, which are going through crisis, or otherwise. I just wanted to shed light. I want from the our guests to shed light on this problematic. It's not just only the problem of Lebanon, but also other countries such as Morocco. I am going to answer your question, but just the part that concerns me. If I may, Professor Abir, you spoke about about foreign experiences in European countries. You mentioned Spain, but you did not go into details about these solutions. We must know the recommendations and concrete solutions that might fix this problem of vacant housing. I'm going to answer my part. Lebanon has specificities that are different than other Arab countries. In Lebanon, we have a diaspora. Most of the diaspora, after years of work, they aim to obtain a house in Lebanon. Therefore, we have vacant housing. If we do taxation and force those people to rent their houses, is the only solution, most effective solution to increase revenues for the country, and also make this be integrated into the economy. We might use something rather than taxation, but there is no one in a foreign country. They all have houses, but they don't want anyone else to come to their houses. Therefore, they do not use it for rental. We need to change the way people think in the region. We need some rehabilitation, so we can convince those people to invest in these houses and be protected legally. Lebanon, the Lebanese constitution of protection of private tenure or ownership, as Abir mentioned, and this must be applied in Lebanon, we have to change the legislations and laws in a way that might go with the conditions in which we live. 50 years ago, there was no displacement or this vacancy in these houses, but now it is persistent. Thank you for your intervention. I also want to thank Madame Claudine for what concerns the vacancy. This is not just something that's going on in Lebanon, but also it is something where all the countries in the world suffer from. Housing now is a commodity that generates money. They either use it as a place where they can generate money. Therefore, housing in general now is a money generation source. There are now policies in order to limit vacancy. In France, in Vancouver, Spain or Cyprus, there are some policies. These policies are about tax vacant housings based on the years of vacancy and also the reason behind the vacancy, why this house is vacant, and also is it open for rent, or the owner does not want it to be rent and he doesn't want to use it. Therefore, he is being taxed for that. There is a country that took a radical approach. There is a European country, I don't remember the name, maybe it is Switzerland, I am not sure about the name. What I know is that it's European. If your apartment is vacant and someone comes to it, he is legally, or he can legally stay there because your place is vacant. In Lebanon, and I believe that in most of the Arab countries, we have the right of ownership. It is very upheld, this right. We don't want to reach this point. We saw that in the war, even though the newly built buildings were people did squatting in those new cities. So people took these places for themselves, although they are not theirs. And this was illegal. And not through government mechanisms. It was informal. What we suggest, our proposal is the following: to give the government the right to go into an agreement with the owner to use his apartment for affordable housing, for example, in emergencies, or in just to have this to have enough apartment in the city for people with low and medium income. We are not trying to force it on the owner, but we are trying to give incentives to the owners in order to take part. Taxation is one element that might be used, but also we have to take a look at the type of a vacancy. This must be regulated through policies. A newly built apartment in towers in luxurious neighborhoods. These places are big places. They must be. I mean, we have to tax those places. We cannot force the owner to rent this place, but we can. However, we can tax. So if you choose to let or to if you choose that your apartment would be vacant, you would pay taxation. There are also inheritance problems. In these cases, we can use mechanisms where we can incorporate UN organizations or development agencies who can work and agree with the owner in order to allow room for more housing. These are among the solutions we think of. That depends on the type of vacancy, of course. We think of what type of intervention we want to apply without reaching this point of squatting, which is the solution. The solutions you mentioned, I did not talk about these solutions. I only talked about the barriers and the complicities that can stop this projects, and how can we fix it through soft financing and to have a party that is managing those buildings. In the laboratory of cities, we are trying to see how we can apply this mechanism in the heart of Beirut. I cannot go into details now because this is confidential. However, at some point in the future, we can discuss this. Not only in Europe, but also in Brazil and Brussels in Belgium. I'm going to give you an example. In Brussels, they adopted something called temporary agreement. The owner with a vacant house or apartment, they tell him that they are going to do rehabilitation, and in order to use his apartment. After the Russo-Ukrainian crisis, this was adopted. For example, you can go into an agreement with a Ukrainian refugee, and then you can give him the apartment for free, and then there is an exit plan of how to exit eventually from the unit without having any problems in the long term. These agreements, there was the government involved and also the owner alongside other organizations. For what concerns these solutions, are there legislations within Lebanon for what concerns taxation? This is for taxations on owners or the diaspora. Do you think that this is going to affect the number of buildings and stop the diaspora from buying new houses? Thank you for your question. Of course, there is going to be an impact, but the taxation is something that we are going to do. It is going to start slowly. We are going to take into consideration the years of vacancy. There is an association. We are going to do a consultation with all the private sector and see how we can tax without having an impact on the diaspora. And there are we discussed this thing previously in Lebanon, but there was a refusal. The diaspora are putting pressure on the government because if they might stop investments in Lebanon and they might go to Cyprus or Greece and invest there instead. Therefore, in multiple times in discussions, the implementation of these taxes on vacant housing stock. There might be, we are discussing solutions. If you have more than 2 houses, for example, we tax that. If you have 1 vacant house, it's different. We are trying to establish formulas. For disputed buildings where there is squatting, we are trying to implement a project. For example, we are trying to ease the legal frameworks and also apply lawyers in order to fix these problems. And for example, if you have, when it comes to inheritance problems. So we are trying to agree with the government. So if we fix these problems, and then you have this ownership of land, the government would have to use affordable renting. I just want to add something for Madam Nadim. In Lebanon, we do not have a place that is free from taxation. If I live in an apartment, what the Ministry of Finance asks is to nullify taxation on vacant houses. It's not a taxation on vacant houses precisely, but the apartment is just exempted from taxation. This should not affect taxation that you pay to the municipality or to the Ministry of Finance. This is for cleaning the city and also the utilities of the city. If you, as an investment, if you want to buy an apartment in Beirut, you need utilities and public services. So in order for this to happen, the owners and the tenants, they also pay. So both parties need to contribute to the municipality for it to do its work. If you leave your house vacant, this affects the public services and utilities. This is the point. A note on the sidelines. It's not about the legal and technical framework mentioned, but I'm going to talk about another point about vacancy, because it is the subject of your question. we have to take into consideration that this topic can take a more radical path. We have to take into consideration that birth rates in the world are decreasing. Therefore, we might reach a point where instead of population growth, there is going to be a decrease in population growth. This problem of vacancy is going to increase and be more radical. We must think about solutions from now, because we are going to face a huge, much bigger problem in the future.
To thank our speakers again for the informative session. And I hope this session has provided all of you with valuable information and the renowned sense of urgency to address critical HLP challenges. So this concludes our session, and thank you everyone for participating.